Oh my goodness, my camera. Okay, phone. It's on like three. It's on like how many things do I have? I have my computer and a notebook and a book and another notebook and another book and another book and now my water bottle and it's in between. Anyways, welcome to another table talk that's happening the same time except I put on my contacts. Anyways, today, right now in this moment, because I got a lot of ideas in my brain. My brain be thinking, oh no, think so hard. We're talking about. I'm going to talk about inheritance because this is something it always confuses me, right? Because we read the Bible. A lot of times I read the Bible and I forget that there's context. We have to think of context of the time period. Because if we compare it to now, we're like, nah, that sucks. But I'm reading through Numbers 27 and it's talking about the daughter's inheritance. So these daughters of Zelophehad. I think that's how it's pronounced. Zelophehad. And so he got a whole bunch of daughters. How many? No, Noah, Chogla, Mikla, and Tirsha, and Mala. So they all come there and they're like, "Hey, our dad died. He didn't do anything wrong because this is right after basically there were a whole bunch of guys and they were getting manipulated into having sex with a whole bunch of women who were Moabites, and then they were all these Moabite women were like, this was a king set up, and he was like, I don't like the Israelites because they're scary and there's a million of them. Let me come and manipulate all the men because the men we all know we like one thing and that's sex, and so the king sends a whole bunch of women to go basically get the Israelite men to sleep with them, and then because they had sex with them, the men are like, okay, we'll praise your God and do whatever because we gonna get it, which is whack, and it's wild, and it also tells you better be watching that thing because keeping your brain. This is the head you gotta be thinking with, and so this is a crazy way to start talking about the Bible. I feel like, but that's just what happened. I feel like that's a crazy way to describe it, but I feel like it's also probably the most accurate and most understandable way to put it. Anyways, we're talking about inheritance. So basically, all these men died. These girls, their dad died, but he wasn't one of them sleeping with all these women. And so they're like, hey, Moses, our dad is dead, and there's an inheritance to be given. Can we have it? Because he doesn't have any sons. And Moses does a crazy thing. Now this is where the context comes in play. Okay? If we look at women from a context of nowadays, we go, wow, women had an awful time. And it's true. Women over the course of history have had a really rough go at it. Let's be honest. They've had a lot of really sucky things, had to deal with a lot of awful situations, and their lives kind of generally sucked pretty much all of history. They really just got kind of shafted a lot. Anyways, anyways, here's where we have to remember the context. Women have no rights anywhere at this point in time. So any win we can get for women at this point in time is a win. Okay, it's a win, right? And so that goes into a whole bunch of things as we talk about in the Old Testament. The fact that like the Israelite women were really the first women to have any rights at all, any kind of protection, get any kind of respect from, especially that men had to adhere to, because that's the big part of it is men had to respect it because it came from God. And so men had to do these things and respect that women like wearing head coverings, basically saying like, you don't get to objectify me and treat me like your little, you don't get to look at me like in that day porn. Basically, they don't get to over sexualize them. You have to respect me and you have to choose to marry me and love me before you even get to see me in all my beauty. And then there's also like practical stuff of like why women wore head coverings because they're in the desert, and you have to remember the Middle East is very hot. It's very dirty. People didn't take baths. There were no showers. Everybody was nasty and it's dirty. And so a head covering was actually a really great idea. Also protected your hair from getting really matted and disgusting because we see that in other parts of the world, right? We think of other areas where like people because it was out in the air, it got matted and it's if you got thick hair and you're in the dust and the desert and a lot of their hair was curly because that's just how in that area region like your hair wasn't flat and straight, like it was curly and it was voluminous, and so it was it would easily get tangled if it was whipping around in the wind. You also can look at like how dirty it was. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. There's a reason why that women didn't have a lot of rights, okay? But the Israelite women were given, the first women that were given at least steps in a positive direction. So we have to take the wins where we get them. That's the important thing to remember for context. Like, we got to take the wins where we can get them, and over time, things start improving. But this is a big deal. This is the first big deal. Because Moses goes, and I'm going to read directly. What Zelophehad's daughter says is correct. You are to give them hereditary property among their father's brothers and transfer their father's inheritance. Transfer their father's inheritance to them. When a man dies without having a son, transfer his inheritance to his daughter. And then, if he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, gives his inheritance to his father's brothers. This is a big deal. Because think about this. This is the first time, one of the first times in human history, and Moses is telling these women this. He's saying, okay, your father's brothers and your father's brothers, basically the rest of the men in the area, the other men in the area that want to swoop in and want to say that they can take it, don't get to, because you get the inheritance. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Because you hear these women who are like, we don't got a dad. I'm going to zip this up. You can see that I'm having like a weird neck thing. I think it's because I've been yelling for like 2 hours straight, so my neck is all red. But I don't know. Anyways, I'm just going to hide it just because I feel subconscious. Anyways, do you see that's a big deal? This is the first time that women are being told you can own property, basically. And not only can you own property, but now you have the responsibilities along with that property. You aren't just a figurehead. Now you're in charge of the inheritance. And this is the other aspect I want to go into, because I think it always confused me, so I just want to like clear my mind, because I feel like God was telling me, he was like, here's your epiphany about this situation. We have to think of the context of inheritance at this time. During this point in time, the Israelites, after Passover, have escaped Egypt. They left slavery. They're living in the middle of the Middle East, basically. They're living on the edge of Egypt, Saudi Arabia. I don't actually know the exact region off the top of my head, but it's like kind of that area. It's that area right off, kind of in between, you know what I mean, where it's like Egypt, Saudi Arabia area. Because eventually they'll go into the land of Canaan, where they go into Egypt, Syria. Anyways, they're in the Middle East. Okay, I want you to remember this. They just escaped Egypt. Actually, oh my gosh, why don't I'm saying all these things, and I'm trying to just use it in my brain, but why don't I use this handy-dandy, convenient little map that's in my little Bible here? Wow, here's some context. Here they are. Random wilderness on the edge. Here is, right? Here's the Nile. Here's Lower Egypt. This is where they came from, okay? And here they are wandering on the edge, basically on the peninsula. They're saying, hey, this is Saudi Arabia, Syria kind of area, and then here's like Canaan, and eventually up into Israel. That's important to remember, okay? So let's think of that, okay? At this point in time, You have a whole bunch of thousands of people walking in the middle of the woods. That's what they're doing. They're hanging out in the woods. They're hanging out in this really rough terrain. Okay. Here's what's important to remember about the context of the time. They're in a really rough terrain. You have to remember that at this point in time, there's not like nice little roads. There's not nice little paths that you can nicely make your way through the woods. No, it's wilderness. And if you look at the topographical map, which this Bible, I think if I looked at it, you can see in just a little bit, I don't know if you can see that close, but there's little mountains in there. This region happens to be very, very diverse in terms of geographical landforms and geological landforms, but in geography and in topography. So you have a whole bunch of people in this very difficult area. Let's get that started, okay? The place where they were living was really rough, okay? They weren't living on nice plains in Kansas. This wasn't like easy, comfy farming, not easy comfort area. It's very, very rough. In addition to that, we have to remember it's very dangerous, okay? There isn't modern medicine, so I'm going to get to a point eventually, but this is the context for it. It's very dangerous, right? There's no modern medicine, so if people get hurt, they have one of two things. They have one of only a few options. You can deal with this injury. Say you fall on a giant rock, you get a giant cut. Your option is leave it as it is and try to cover it. That's what you can do. You can chop off a limb and hope that you survive the blood loss. That's what you can do. The other option is an awful option, which is you can try to clean it at this point in time. Let's remember, we don't have modern medicine. There's no Neosporin. There's no nice little bandages that you can put on it. There's no, healing serums. You can try to put some, there might have been some herbs that maybe you could try to find if you could get in contact with somebody who knows that kind of stuff, but a lot of people didn't. You didn't necessarily always have that option, and sometimes you got hurt in a position where you don't exactly have a lot of time to heal this issue. You could die from this unless you were nearby or unless you were in a safe place where there was somebody who knew these and as well had the ability to get to the herbs quickly. You could die. You could get an infection and you could die just like that. So the other option was you sear something, you burn it, you get it extremely hot, typically metal, and then you burn out and you clean the wound. That's awful. Okay? So it's important to remember, and not only that, so it's very dangerous. People die very easily. I'm getting somewhere, okay? The reason why I bring this up is because not only is it dangerous if you get hurt by yourself in case, natural things, but also there are animals. If you really want to dive into how dangerous the world is, I want you to remember humans have been around for a long time and have killed a lot of species of animals. Okay? There's a lot of animals that are extinct because people have killed them. If you want to do a really cool in-depth history and really look into how dangerous the world has been, look at the extinct animals. When you talk about, and the thing is, the extinct animals aren't the small ones. We see areas where in the rainforests and stuff, you look at the Galapagos, there's all these animals that are small, right? Frogs, lizards, birds, super unique creatures that are small, agile, and can avoid issues. The animals that got killed a lot of the time were not small animals. The reason why an animal was killed was either it made for good meat or it would kill you. It was either be hunted or those were the options, right? You're either predator or prey. So We killed animals that were prey so that we could eat and kill them. And then we also killed animals that were terrifying and giant. If you want to look at dire wolves, you want to look at saber-toothed tigers, I mean, there's a ton of different animals that are extinct now that were huge and terrifying that we had to kill. So, and also you have to remember, there's no little towns. The animals at this point in time, they aren't staying away from people. They were hungry, and they gonna kill. So it's important to recognize anytime you're out in the wilderness, there was a chance, actually anytime you're out in general, there's a chance that an animal might come up. Animals aren't necessarily trained at this point in time, especially when a whole bunch of random people start showing up. They aren't necessarily accustomed to going, let me just stay away and I'll take my own territory, let them have it. No, animals are vicious, and they would kill you and kill your livestock if you messed around with them. So, that's the first part that I'm getting to, is this dangerous area. So what does this have to do with inheritance? Well, it has to do with what the inheritance is. Let's go back to remembering that the Israelites are now in the woods, okay? So, and now they're trying to create these camps. They don't have stuff necessarily. These were slave people who were fleeing from Egypt. They may have some money, they may have some belongings, and they may have some things that they've been building, but they're not having stuff. What they have is land that they've been plowing, that they have managed to turn into usable land for either farming, ranching, or hunting. So, the inheritance that we're looking at is that land and the animals. We're not looking at stuff. It's not nowadays where your stuff is a nice freaking house and, the bank account. You're looking at land, a shack, most likely a shack, maybe pots and pans, a few, clay pots and pans, in a fire spot, some blankets or weaving that maybe you did, and then whatever animals and land that you have managed to that the father has managed to cultivate. So when we talk about inheritance, the inheritance is easy for us nowadays to go like, oh, they're getting money. No, they're not asking for money. They're not asking for stuff. These women are not asking for stuff. They're asking for an area that will help them survive. They're asking Moses, and Moses is telling them that this is how it's going to work, is that if you don't have any sons, the responsibility and the survival of the land is yours now. The inheritance isn't stuff. You're not getting a chance to go to Bora Bora. You're not getting, you're not going to be able to take a cruise. All you're getting is the ability to now be in charge of, well, at that time they also took slaves, which is a whole other issue. But now you're in charge of the responsibilities and the land and the people on that land and the animals and the protection of that land. That is your inheritance. So it's a big deal. And it's hard to get that context, but it's important to remember, what Moses is giving them isn't necessarily stuff, it's responsibility. And so this is a big deal, because now these women are Moses is saying, women, you can be responsible for this stuff. And that's a huge deal, because up to this point, it's basically men get to decide what they want, and women a lot of the time felt like they didn't have any responsibility in terms of those specific works. Now God is telling Moses, through Moses, saying, this isn't necessarily how it should be forever, because eventually there will be a son and he will eventually take it. However, in this interim time, because there's no one who needs to step up, I want you to step up because I know you're capable of it. because you've grown on this land. And it's not only one woman. It's not just him saying, the only woman, she gets to take charge. She gets to do whatever she wants. He's saying, no, the responsibility is as a team, because it's hard. It's hard living in this land. So, yeah, you guys get to have it. You guys get to work together and have this land that your father worked hard for and that you've worked hard for, that there was no one to pass it on to. And so you now get the responsibilities. It wasn't intended necessarily that you will always have this responsibility, because having that kind of responsibility in this awful climate is really rough. Because that goes into my next part of the talk, which is why inheritance went to the sons. Which is also important for this context, right? Because in order for us to see why it's a big deal that women would be given this, and why it's also why it's a big deal, was we have to look at how their lives worked, right? Their lives sucked. Okay, people didn't have you didn't have a career. Okay, that wasn't a thing. Your career was you go outside and you try to keep your family surviving, basically. You work with your neighbors and you work with each other and try to survive. And also, as I said, it's really dangerous. So, the men were the ones who went out there, because when we look at it, it's like, are you going to put the mother of your children, if you are a husband and a wife, here's what I'm going to ask you. Are you going to put the mother of your children into a position where you're in a dangerous position with a whole bunch of animals, in a really rough natural environment? Because also the weather and the terrain, it's very rocky at certain points, it's sandy at other points. It's not, there's a lot of weird plants, a lot of weird animals. You can get very injured. Are you going to risk the safety of your wife, or are you as a mother going to risk your own safety? Because one of you has to stay inside with the kids. You also remember, people are having 12 kids. You know what I mean? It's normal for people to have giant families. So one of you has to stay with the kids. You're not going to just let your 3-year-old, you're not going to be like, I want to work, so I'm going to go out into the middle of the woods. Both me and my spouse are going to go out in the middle of the woods. And the 3-year-old and the 2-year-old and the 1-year-old can take care of themselves for the afternoon. No, you're not going to do that. That's stupid. There are dangerous things, and people are dangerous. There's no laws. There's no law enforcement. You're on your own. It is the wild, wild west. East, but west. It's not safe for you to leave kids unattended. So, here's the thing. One of you has to go out there, fight either the wild animals, or one of you has to take care of the family. And so that typically, the family went to the mom because she said, I birthed these freaking kids. They came out of me. And my husband, and you have to remember, nobody's working out. So the only workouts you're getting is either you're working outside or you're not. And so women were like, we're birthing the kids. We're going to take care of them. Because honestly, the kids are going to be better behaved if I'm watching them. Specifically, the daughters. Now let's get back to the fathers, right? So the women are inside being like, someone's got to watch the baby. Somebody's got to... You probably have a 2, a 3, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old at the same time. You may have... there's a lot of kids running around. Someone's got to keep them under control. That's going to be the mom's job. She's going to say, somebody got to watch these kids. I'm going to take care of them because I birthed these kids and they're going to listen to me. The father, on the other hand, somebody's got to take care of the family, right? Someone's got to get the food. Someone's got to plow the field. Someone's got to hunt. Someone's got to do it. We're going to put the husband out there, right? Because that's what he got to do. He got to step up. When it comes to the sons, we have to remember, it's dangerous. And it's hard work. It's not, we're going to work together sitting at a little computer, doing a little messaging. That's not the work you're doing. You're working as hard hours and hours, 6 days a week in the hot sun and rain and the wind and this awful treachery and those animals coming at you. You got to be prepared. And as a father, not only do you want to be prepared so that your life goes good, but also you know that you could die. you're not oblivious to the fact that it's dangerous for you as a man to be taking care of you, to be like, there's animals, and at any moment, if I get hurt or die, my family's gonna be helpless. There's a lot of dangerous stuff out here. We talk about all the wars and all the different people groups that are coming in and snatching each other up all the time. They're killing each other. They're sleeping with their wife. They're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. You're not safe, okay? So the only way you're going to be safe, right, is with either all your neighbor friends being like, okay, all us men are going to come together and we're going to fight them. And the only way you're going to also have that is teaching your sons to do the same thing. So fathers and their sons, and it's changed over the past 100 years, 200 years, but fathers and sons at this point in time, mothers and daughters, and fathers and sons are extremely close. It's super important because the only person who can show true femininity to a young girl is her mother, and the only one who can show true masculinity, other than obviously through God, but I'm talking through a person, is going to be a father and a son. And so the son works with the father on the land. The mother and the daughter work on raising kids, helping all the siblings, making sure that the house is, that things are working in a safe way. Not that they weren't working outside. They probably were working in the field, probably close by. They probably were working with all the animals near the house. But obviously, as a parent, as a father, you wouldn't want your wife going too far from the house out of safety. Because also, you have to remember, you got wild men out there. Men are raping women. They're doing all sorts of terrible things. There's wild animals. You want your family. You want your wife, who you love and cherish more than anybody else in the world, and your daughters. You want them to be where not only you can see them, but where you know that if something starts happening, that they'll be able to get inside. They'll be able to be safe. They'll be able to be protected, right? And so you might have women working in the field and stuff, but they're going to be close to the house because it's safer than you don't want your spouse. You don't want them trying to kill a wild animal, right? You don't want them having to do that. They may have to, not that they wouldn't have to, and not that they didn't teach their daughters to say, "Hey, I'm going to show you how to use this knife if an animal comes at you, because you got to be able to protect yourself." That probably happened a lot. They probably, there's no doubt. Like, you look at Viking women, like those women were tough because they taught them. They're like, this is going to be a rough life for you, and people are going to try to take advantage of you, and so you got to be able to protect yourself. There's going to be wild animals. There's going to be wild men who are going to try to take advantage of you, so you got to be able to protect yourself. But anyways, back to what I'm saying. The sons and the fathers were close, and so the father took that responsibility and was working with his son every day, his one son or many sons. He was showing him, hey, this is how you do this. This is how you be successful. This is how not only can we as a family survive, how we can thrive, but also in the event that I die, you'll be able to take care of the family. This is the other important part when we talk about inheritance. As I mentioned earlier, that land, you're not thriving, you're surviving. So that land and the animals on it and the people on it are the ones who you have to care for when the father dies. That inheritance is responsibility. It's not just stuff. Some of it's stuff, some of it's money, right? Right? Wealthy people. But especially at this point in time, and while they're in the wilderness, it's like if the dad dies, which a lot of men did. And you have to remember the age. Like, a lot of men, you're not living a long time. Some of them did. Some of them were, 60, 70. So sometimes it was like, you were a grown man and your father dies. And then you have that inheritance. But a lot of times, you're a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old man, young boy, a kid. And your father dies. And now what you have, all that land that your dad worked tirelessly on, 6 days a week, all day, trying to keep you and your siblings, because let's remember, no birth control, you probably had a whole bunch of siblings. They're now your responsibility. Your inheritance is now I have to care and provide for my family. It's not I'm getting a trip. You're not getting money. Your inheritance is you're now the man of this family. You're the spiritual leader, the person that people go to. There's tons of parts in the Old Testament where they talk about sacrifice. So they're your sacrifice. You're the one who has to go, okay, we have to do this offering. We have to sacrifice. I have to go to war. I have to fight in this war. You are now the head of the battle. It is now your inheritance. It is now yours. Your mother is now your responsibility to take care of and look after. Your siblings, your little brothers and sisters are now your responsibility to help, not only help survive and protect. You're the one who has to go fight. You're the one who has to fight that bear. You're the one who has to kill all the insects that are crawling around the house. You're the one who has to deal with if a man tries to rape your mother or your sisters. Or you're now in charge of all of the cattle and the land, of cultivating it, making sure that it survives. It's a responsibility. And it was a responsibility that was passed because as a son, you and your father spent all those hours, and hopefully your father was giving that into you. You know, I think of my own parents and like, the only reason why I've been able to grow is because my parents poured into me, especially when I started really accepting what my dad had done over my life and how he had raised me, and when we could actually have spiritual conversations and have real conversations, when he imparted that wisdom onto me and the skills and the determination and the blessings that he wanted to share with me, that was when I discovered those things. And so that's what I think about, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he was giving responsibility. And not only that, but if you were married and had your own family, now not only are you in charge of making sure that you have whatever, and you were living next door. You probably were living next door. You weren't probably living somewhere far off from your family. Like the rest of your family was probably next door. Like you probably just built a little shack and part of the land was now yours to take care of and part of the animal. But now here you are saying, not only do I have my family and me, my wife, and my 3 kids or 7 kids or whatever, but now I have my mother and all of my siblings, who are a lot of the time probably little kids, and probably not just like one of them, it's probably multiple. Now they're my responsibility to look after as well. So when we talk about that inheritance of why it was so important, because you were spending all that time, a father and a son were spending all that time together. The son was working the land, and therefore he knew how it worked, and therefore he was given it. And so to be like, okay, these daughters, this is now your land. These women were asking for responsibility, which is a big deal, right? That's some powerful women being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take on that responsibility. And now they did. And now Moses was like, you can handle it. Because he wanted to show like, yeah, women are responsible. They can take care of it. I don't want you to necessarily have to take care of it, because it should go to the son is, if there were sons, they were working with the father. They were probably the most comfortable. But because the man didn't have sons, he probably showed his daughters. If you don't have the sons to pour into, you're going to pour into the daughters, right? So the reason why it's if you don't have sons, give it to your daughters, because the daughters probably were raised learning how to do it. They probably were doing all the dirty jobs that typically the sons would be given, because obviously the father was like, I want this land to keep going. I want our family to keep thriving and surviving. So I'm going to teach you how to take care of it. And I need extra hands. That's just how it works, right? And so these women were capable. And so it was okay, right, for Moses to say, yeah, it can be your responsibility because you know how. Because guess what? Your father probably prepared you. And so it is completely understandable. and also keeping it in the family, right? The importance of genealogy throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, throughout Israel's history, very important. And so, it was God's way of being like, I, I see who you are. I see your family. I don't want your family to be done. I don't want your family lying. You're strong people, and I believe you're capable because your father took care of you, and your father is giving you, your father raised you and probably prepared you, and so I'm going to give that responsibility to you. And so that was a huge part, and such a huge win for the women, and being like, yeah, you are capable. Um, and so I guess that kind of just goes into the inheritance piece that I wanted to talk about, and understanding like when we look at the context, whenever we think of inheritance, because it's easy to look at it like, oh, they're just getting money or they're just getting stuff. No, inheritance in the Bible, and you see it over and over again, right? Solomon's inheritance from his father, King David, wasn't necessarily, it was partially kingship, but now it was the responsibility of the entirety of Israel, right? Abraham, the inheritance from Abraham to Isaac, and then Isaac to Jacob, and then Jacob to his 12 sons, was not necessarily money. It wasn't comfort. The inheritance was responsibility, saying, I've done my best to raise you and to teach you in the way that you should grow. And the wisdom that I gave you, that's your inheritance. Your inheritance is the things and the hard work and the faith and the love of God that has manifested in both what is here, but also, in both lovely gifts and food and money and comforts and family and friendship and those kind of great things, all the positive things. But the inheritance is also the responsibilities. It's the ability, you are given the responsibility, the inheritance of stepping up, of growing, of learning, of becoming what it means to truly be a man or woman of God. And so that, I think, is such a big culminating thing that I guess I never really thought about, that its inheritance isn't just a comfy thing. Our inheritance in Christ isn't just comforts and blessings. It's not just like, I get to have a nice life, I'll get to go to heaven. It's also, I get the responsibility of sharing the gospel, of loving people, of sacrificing myself, of dying to myself, of pushing away and fighting this evil that is within me and around me. I'm getting a responsibility, is my inheritance as well. Inheritance that I get to push and give myself, and it may hurt. The inheritance is not always comfy and easy, but it is worth something, that there's value in it. That's what inheritance is. It's what there is of value, of community, of people, of things, of hard work, of character, of faith. You're giving you this responsibility so that you can become a better person. And so, yeah, that's just kind of what, I know that was probably a lot, and that probably was a little confusing. And I'm sure probably some of it could have been more eloquent, or I could be wrong on some things for sure. But that's just kind of what I wanted to share, talking about kind of inheritance and what it means to, like, how big of a deal it was for those women to, like, basically be given responsibility. And that's a huge step, because women weren't expected to have responsibilities other than just giving birth and, making babies. Making babies, taking care of babies. That wasn't, and being hot like that. that wasn't their only responsibilities. To look nice and have kids and to take care of those kids. But it was also that, if a father or a husband dies, then your responsibility is then your inheritance, that you now get to take on that role. And that's a beautiful gift that a lot of women didn't get to have. They didn't, there's a pain that comes with responsibility, but there's also such a strength, right? That's why people want to work. That's why we're like, we're designed to want to work. We're designed to want to accomplish things. We're designed to want to keep growing. And this is kind of one of the first examples in history where women were given that opportunity that said, we want you to be responsible for something because we know you can handle it. That, it's not a shame. It's a beautiful thing to be a stay-at-home mother and to raise your kids and to be a loving wife, and that's a beautiful thing. Or to be a single woman and to care and love for the people in your life and to work hard for them and to care about them and to give yourself for in every aspect that you can. But in a family context, it's also a beautiful thing. And we know you're capable of taking on the responsibility of leading. If there's, that you can take on that responsibility of leading. That's not necessarily that you have to do it alone and that you should do it alone. But when the situation presents itself, that God is going to prepare you for that. And God is going to use you in that. And so that's such a cool thing that I think God uses. Like men have that responsibility, and women can be given that like men can be given that responsibility, women can be given that responsibility. We're all part of the body of Christ. And sometimes situations come up and you're like, sometimes you're not given that responsibility. Sometimes it's like, your job is to do this. This is where God wants you. And then sometimes God says, we want to put you somewhere else. And it may not be comfortable, and it may not be seen as the regular, and it may not be the stereotypical, but God's going to use you. And that works across the board, I believe. Because it's rough out there. It's rough out there in the lives of these women and men and women in the olden days. They were living a different life than we are now. And so that's important. But I just thought that was a cool thing to talk about, just because I never really thought deep about it. And I don't hear a lot about it either. So I thought it was good to share. But hope you have a lovely day. And we'll see what other table talks come to my brain. I might do one later, but I feel like I've been talking for hours and I don't know if I mentally have the energy to do more. So